What a wonderful movie, what a wonderful row of statements in support of Prime. And I'm so happy to see the dedication, the commitment from all over the world to our joint agenda. And I'm, of course, also happy to listen to Andrew Main Wilson. And I'm sure you all heard him talk about the growth that he's expecting, that he's hoping us to achieve. And also the major, he said, major funding that he hoped for us to achieve. And also the student involvement. And I have to say, I agree with all of it, and we will do our very best. But of course, as always, I need your support to help me. And that is wonderful to know that it is there. Before we continue with our first distinguished panel, I just wanted to inform you about a few of the main results from the student survey that we have done over the past 2 months here in preparation for the Prime Global Forum. And a few of the you could say a few of the main results that came out are interesting. And I already mentioned one of them, and that is how students are actually asking. I'm here talking about leadership students in our management schools, in our business schools, all around the world. And they are asking us, saying that, they want to understand more about climate change and environment, because that is not exactly the main target, the main objective, the main subject matter on the curriculum. So I think that there is a good potential for us. I know that a lot of you are already working with that. We have a Prime working group on climate change as well in support. But I think that this is something that students are asking for. It is something that we should consider more systematically. How can we also, from a Prime community perspective, help and inspire each other to do that? The other result I wanted to bring here for you from the student survey is that students are asking to make responsible management education more innovative. And students are saying that they would like to make learning more meaningful and facilitating active engagement as a very important issue. And the majority of our students are asking for advocating for bringing more hands-on practice and real-life learning experiences to the classroom. And again, I know that many of you do that, and many of you are actually bringing real-life experiences into the classroom and beyond. But again, students asking for it, it is something that we should consider how we can engage in even better as we go into the future. So I think it's a good call to action from students, focus on climate change, focus on new types of pedagogies and skill set training in the classroom. And again, what Andrew Main Wilson also just said here, this is exactly the large programmatic work that we have embarked on this year with the help of all 17 chapters around the world, the LEGO Foundation project, which is about skill set development and novel pedagogies and how that can bring our leadership students better into the practice when they leave our classrooms and become the leaders of the world. I would like to, before I finish here and hand over to our first distinguished panel, I would just like to say that also for next year, we have already started to think about the Global Forum 2023. And of course, we are already now starting to hope for and think that we will be there, we will meet in person. And of course, we will prepare for a hybrid version of the Prime Global Forum to ensure the maximum inclusivity. But what we're doing is we're also liaising with a few other organizations around the world to make a sort of not only Global Forum for a 1.5 day journey into visit us here in New York, but also to ask other organizations if they would like to be with us on responsible management education experience from a different perspectives in that week in June here in New York. So you will travel to New York, not just for the Global Forum, but also for other exciting movements and organizations who will be there with us. So I'm in conversation with NBS, Network for Business Sustainability, to collaborate with them. So we will join forces next year within the same week, and hope for you to make the travel to New York. I'm also in contact with Impact Scholar Community and also with PIR, of course, and we hope to be able to do something together. And I'm happy to say that I'm also in conversation with Fordham University and the incoming dean at the business school Gabelli to discuss if we could make that school again the premise for our 2023 endeavor. But more about that later. For now, let's start with the wonderful 2022 Global Forum, and I'm super excited to here welcome Tima Bansal, professor at Ivey in Canada, who has generously agreed to moderate this first distinguished panel. And Tima, it's a true pleasure as always to welcome you. I am very happy, I'm very honored that you are here with me today, not just as a professor, but also in your capacity as Vice Chair of the Prime Global Board. So, warm welcome to you, Tima. Thank you.
Meta, thank you. And it's actually my honor to be able to host this panel. It's very exciting to have Prime with so much energy right now and under Meta's leadership. I think that there's some really great things to come, so stay tuned. This panel is to talk about teaching, and I've got 4 amazing panelists I get to chat with. I will introduce each of them very briefly, and then we'll get right into the conversation. So we have Lerzan Aksoy, who's the interim dean-elect of Fordham University, Gabelli School of Business. She starts in that position on July 1st. So in a couple of months, Lerzan, you're going to be working even harder. She's currently the Associate Dean of Strategic Initiatives and Professor of Marketing and the Managing Director of the Responsible Business Coalition. Andrew Karolyi, I'll introduce next, is a Dean of Cornell's S.C. Johnson School of Business. He's a Professor of Finance and holder of the Harold Bierman Jr. Distinguished Professorship in Management. Varun Nagaraj is the Dean at the S.P. Jain Institute of Management and Research in Mumbai, India. And during his 30-year career, he has actually worked in Boston and the Silicon Valley in product innovations. So he's held various leadership roles in venture-funded startups and public companies. And finally, Enase Okonedo. She's a Vice-Chancellor of Pan Atlantic University in Lagos, Nigeria. Welcome, Enase. And prior to this, she was the Dean of the Lagos Business School from 2009 to 2020. I want to recognize Andrew and Enase for both being on the Prime board. I also want to recognize how fantastic it is to have such an international group of people. So we have Lerzan and Andrew, who are from the US, New York, and near New York, in Ithaca, and then Enase in Lagos, and then Varun in Mumbai. So this is really quite the global context in which we get to have this fantastic conversation. Varun, what time is it there?
Well, I'm actually in Manhattan, so it's,
very. So you're not quite as not quite as tired. And Asi, what about you? What time is it there?
It's 1:30 in the afternoon.
Oh, good. Okay, so we're all ready to roll now. And I have the warm-up question that I was going to ask just each of them to dialogue around is to say what are the good practices and alternative pedagogies we could use to educate future responsible business leaders in challenging times. And I want to say that each of them will respond individually. We'll dialogue a bit, and then we'll move on to the next question in which each of them can respond. And that's about specific practices. And the third question towards the end will be the challenges of actually executing. So that's what you can anticipate. So why don't we start with Lerzan and then move to Andrew, Enase, and then Varun. So what are the good practices and alternative pedagogies in such challenging times? Lerzan.
Thanks, Tima. So I think all of us are aware that our students are graduating in really unprecedented times. We're facing geopolitical instability. We're in the middle of a pandemic and maybe future pandemic realities. We know there's climate-related global transformation, and we also are in the midst of very much a racial justice awakening. So it is paramount that we educate leaders who are prepared to make a difference in a time where I really believe their leadership is most desperately needed. So I know you were asking some questions about potentially practices at our school, and Our stated mission at the Gabelli School is to educate compassionate global leaders who will use the power of business to move society forward. So clearly this is a lofty goal, and creating responsible business leaders is a big undertaking, and it has many moving parts, but our focus area has been on particularly two things, and that is curriculum innovation and real world relevant practice. So let's talk about curriculum first. We're working to infuse ESG literacy throughout the curriculum. We have currently over 30 courses in business alone that are directly related to sustainability and social responsibility and ESG. And that doesn't include the sort of vast number of liberal arts courses. But in addition to that, we've been very, I think it's very important for business schools to infuse ESG literacy into the core curriculum across business disciplines. So I can speak more to that if you'd like. So the second focus area is this idea of real world relevant practice and engaging undergraduate and graduate students with hands-on learning opportunities, as we heard from many of our keynote speakers as well. This, through consulting projects with industry partners is one of the ways that we do it. Managing, an ESG fund that's part of our endowment, just to name a few. But the Gabelli School is also home to the only national barometer of customer perceptions of firms' social innovativeness. And we do this across 20 industries, over 200 brands, and we've been measuring this for the past 5 years. And the way we link it to students is we hold an annual innovation conference so the students can meet with and learn from America's most socially innovative companies. So we're fortunate that our students recognized our efforts in championing responsible business and have been vocal about it. So as a result, we were recently recognized as being #1 on corporate social responsibility education by Bloomberg Businessweek, and #2 on ethical decision making.
Terrific. Thank you, Lerzan. Very impressive. And it reinforces what Meta was saying earlier, that that students really want to have that real world experience. So appreciate that. Andrew, I know that Cornell's been doing some really fantastic stuff as well. I'd love to hear what you think are the forward-looking practices. Oh, and you have to mute for us to hear you. There we go. No. Okay. Try one more time, and then if not, we might go to Varun. No? Okay, I'm going to let our producer try to work that out with you, Andrew, but we will definitely get you back here. Varun?
Thanks, Tima. So 3 things that I think are useful to think of when thinking of pedagogy and changes we could make to create more responsible managers. The first part is really, I think, making sure that our managers or our students who will become managers understand the value of inclusivity of perspectives. So I think, responsible management requires you to understand sort of a 360-degree view of other people's points of views. And I think there are specific things one can do in the classroom, in every exercise, in every case study, and so on, to always make sure that multiple perspectives are being considered. I think that's relatively low-hanging fruit. The second aspect is really one around focusing on implications. So once you have the perspectives, as the prospective manager is going through their responsible decision-making, understanding the implications of decisions. Now, from a pedagogy point of view, I think it requires our students to be exposed to a couple of tools that perhaps not everybody is exposed to. And so I'm a big proponent here around systems thinking, because I believe from an implications point of view, there really are few better ways of understanding the wide-ranging impact or the wide-ranging implications of decisions. And the second one is really a fairly good grounding in ethical theories and ethical frameworks, because implications have consequences. And being able to sort of think through the implications in some sort of a structured ethical manner, I think makes sense. So I think these are 2 things to add to the pedagogy to make sure that implications are well understood. And the final one, where I think we have a weakness across the board, across management education, is around measurement and instrumentation of action. when we talk about responsible management, a lot of it is about understanding the externalities of various decisions that we make. And externalities are either incorporated into the market mechanisms, in which case one could sort of say, well, that's taken care of, or externalities have to be regulated either externally or internally. But all of that requires some level of instrumentation on what does the implication really mean. And I don't think we as a overall society and management have really figured out how to measure impact. So I'd sort of say these would be sort of the three areas around inclusivity, implications, and instrumentation that I think we should focus our pedagogy on.
Varun, I love what you've just said. And can I just ask for one clarification? And it's in the inclusivity of perspectives, the very first one. How do you bring in the inclusivity of perspectives?
So some of it really has to do with exposing the students to multiple perspectives, and so to some degree, at least at SPJMR, one of the things we try to do is to make sure that our students who, are earlier in their careers, right? So it's not fair to expect them to know about every single perspective there is. So in addition to encouraging them to be reflective and open-minded and deliberate, and these are mindfulness practices that all our students go through, we also expose them to situations that they have not been exposed to before. So we plunge them into a year of sort of urban poverty. We plunge them into a couple of months of rural challenges and rural poverty in order for them to at least learn perspectives that are not native to them. So I think the ability to think through perspectives with a mindfulness training and meditation and things of that nature that our students go through, along with being exposed to these, discombobulating experiences, I think are the ways we are trying to make sure our students broaden, the funnel through which they gather their perspectives.
I'm absolutely amazed. Mindfulness training and then seeing poverty in real life rather than just reading about it. Fantastic, Varun. Thank you. Andrew, what about your mic? Can we hear you now?
Tima, thank you very much. I am so glad I actually got to go after Varun, because it actually is reinforcing to hear actually Lerzan and Varun, because what I was going to say is really strongly reinforcing of the ideas they're putting forward. When you talk about the best practices in educating responsible business leaders, that's clearly our mission statement as a college and each of the three schools that make up our college. The word that comes to mind that I think of as our responsibility is to build resilience. Resilience is the magic word that I think a lot about. When you think about trying to have students think about business as a force for good, driving towards a sustainable shared prosperity, especially during times like what we're experiencing now with geopolitical uncertainty and the pandemics, post-pandemics, the deglobalization movements. To me, resilience is about building a kind of a muscle memory in students in terms of their skill sets. The muscle memory towards being agile, being entrepreneurial, being data driven in decision making and opportunities. And the other thing that I really hope for students in terms of building resilience is to naturally and organically have a global focus in almost every decision that they're involved with. So it's about agility and this global focus. I think that's what's really going to put them in good standing where we deal with this. Now, how do you develop this? How do you develop these muscles that represent this muscle memory? Well, the way we've been doing it at Cornell, and I'm going to say decades and decades. We're celebrating the 100th anniversary of our Peter and Stephanie Nolan School of Hotel Administration, 75 years of the Johnson Graduate School of Management. We were very early pioneers in this whole business of engaged, immersive, and intensive learning almost at all levels. And we've learned a lot about what is really important in doing this type of learning, this hands-on, roll up your sleeves kind of learning. And one of the important things that we know is critical here is in fact critical reflection. So each of the students that engage in these types of activities have to literally pause and reflect on what the activity was and think about the sort of the grander purpose of the mission of the enterprise that they're supporting and working with, or towards advancing their education. So there's a couple of ideas to get the conversation moving here. So
I love that, Andrew. Can I just ask you a little bit more detail on the critical reflection and having them pause? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So we have this David Einhorn Center for Engaged Learning here at Cornell University. It's a university-wide enterprise, and they've it's coming up on its 10th anniversary, and it's basically a number of professionals who have thought a lot about engaged learning, not just in business world, but also in all disciplines within the academy, and they've come to the understanding that this experience after the fact is so important for the reinforcement of learning. It's sort of a reinforcement learning scientific principle that really helps them to build up their understanding and have it be long-lived. You do it different ways in different programs. I can give you lots of different examples. We have our, in the hotel school here, we have our hotel leadership development program. They go through the experience of working with our laboratory, the Statler Hotel. And after having done this kind of leadership programming, there is a period near the end of their learning in their senior year where they actually pause and reflect on this in a group setting, as well as in writing about it. So there's just lots of examples of having to do that critical pause to reflect on it, again, towards reinforcing the learning.
Fantastic. Enase, I'm so excited to hear what you can tell us about these leading practices.
Thank you very much. And I think that, I agree with most of what it is that my colleagues have said. But I think that as business school educators, I think it goes beyond, and I'm sure we all know this, that it is at once a duty and a responsibility, as well as an imperative, for us to be able to develop the leaders that have the ability to make a strong social impact and contribute to solving problems that are related to this complex world that we found ourselves in. And it is true that over time, we've had business schools that have included responsible management practices in the curriculum. But I do believe that we have to rethink a couple of things, which is the teaching that we do, the research that we do, as well as what it is that we practice. And of course, when we talk about the teaching, obviously, a number of my colleagues have spoken about, the various ways by which we do that, more engaged learning. But what I think is different in what it is that we've sought to do here is to actually, for lack of a better word, cede power to the students and make them own their own learning. And I think that when it comes to the teaching, that can happen in a variety of ways. Certainly, we use the case study methods, but increasingly we're seeing that, those are looking backwards. And when we think about the new and complex problems that, society and businesses are facing, they're burning issues that have to be discussed. So, for instance, in teaching, one of the ways that we started to do that is to have real-time case studies in which we actually bring the company's executive into class with a burning issue that the students engage in trying.
So I know that Enase is frozen on my end. I suspect
it's
just
okay
her.
for us to.
Okay. I'm sorry, Enase, go ahead. We caught that last bit of real-time case studies, and so if you can go from there. Sorry,
okay.
There's a bit of a...
Okay, so I thought, sometimes most times the case studies, they're backward-looking, but then, with the case that the instances and the problems that companies face today, they're burning issues for which there's no precedent. And therefore, looking backwards is not really helpful to the organization. So it's sort of different from consulting because you bring the professionals into class and the company, and the students engage in solving those burning issues. So there are a couple of things that we have to do to make the students own the learning. And I have several examples of them engaging with industry, company visits, Twitter meets. We want to put them in the public eye. Because if you come out and you do a tweet meet and in which you're saying this is what it is that we stand for and we're doing, it's hard for you to renege on that. So it's about more engagement of the students in the learning process. It's about the multidisciplinary research that we have to do right now. And it is also what we as business schools practice, because I think that that's the clearest example. So those are a few thoughts that I'll pause for now.
I absolutely love that, Enase, because you are right that we have a tendency to use what's already happened, and this notion of real-time case studies for problems that haven't yet been solved is really critical and addresses this issue that right now we are facing challenging times in ways that we haven't done before. If I was to synthesize what I've heard, there's a couple of really leading approaches. One is that we need new content, new data, and new frameworks. And so Varun and Lerzan, you both spoke about ESG frameworks, measurement tools that we need. But then the other piece that really seems unusual or new or different is, a second piece, is engagement with industry. And all of you, or industry, or even Varun, you talked about engagement with communities that are challenged. So I think that real world engagement becomes important. The third one, though, that one feels a bit more novel. This notion of mindfulness, this notion of empathy or compassion, I've heard. And that is really different from what we often think about business school perspectives, right? We think about business school perspectives as ESG knowledge. So in the third one, the engagement, compassion, mindfulness, can you give me some very specific practices? Now, Varun, you talked about sending people to communities. How do you get people to do meditation? I'll tell you, my business school students, I put meditation into that classroom and they're not going to necessarily all respond well.
So I think it does, maybe cultural context matters a little bit, as does perhaps the age of the participant or the student. So what we do at SPJMR is slightly different things depending on which program we're talking about. So for our 2-year MBA program, where the average age might be in their mid-20s, for example, we actually have a course that we have either run through the entire first year, or we run it as a semester course called Journey Towards Self-Mastery. We also refer to it as Science of Spirituality. There's nothing religious about it. It's a fairly secular view of taking a look at the insides of yourselves, mindfulness training, if you will. So we actually run it as a 4-credit class where students keep reflective journals on specific topics. And, through the course of the semester, they will reflect upon specific experiences that they might have had. And again, they may not have had very many, being in their mid-20s and so on, and try and apply some of the, the frameworks of the faculty member who's teaching, the Journey Towards Self-Mastery or Science of Spirituality is taking them through. We do the same thing for our executive management programs too, and for our executive management programs where we might have people with 10, 15 years of experience, we also actually, might start a couple of sessions with a little bit of, breathing and mindfulness and so forth, and they're much more prepared to take that and go with it than a 25-year-old, so you do have to temper your approach to your audience. And certainly I think a Western audience might be more skeptical than perhaps the audiences I'm talking about.
Thank you, Varun. Very much appreciate that. And so I'm going to actually ask Lerzan to tell me, you mentioned compassion. How do you build compassion in a Western context?
So compassion, as I said, is part of our mission, and it's something that's very important to us. And the way we do it is really to figure out and put students in situations that are where they can actually understand other person's perspectives and look at what do different stakeholders, how do they actually view the problem. So putting them in those situations and helping them think through and role play how they would approach the same situation and same problem from the viewpoint of those people and different stakeholders is certainly how we do it. The other way we do it is what we call community engaged learning. So we have very, very close partnerships. We are in the Bronx and also in Manhattan at Lincoln Center. So the communities that are surrounding our campus and university, there are many opportunities to connect with businesses and work with them closely. So that actually opens their eyes up to the challenges and the opportunities that are not necessarily very much in their sphere and are very different in terms of where they're coming from. So we include that into our coursework, and I think that's another way that we clearly do it.
That's really fantastic. And I have to say, one thought that's crossing my mind, and I'd love for especially Enase and Andrew to jump in on this one, but in business schools, when we send people out to the community, and they can sometimes take the role that they're helping the poor people or helping people who are disadvantaged. How do you build this notion of that this is a learning environment, this is about them also helping us, educating us? Any thoughts on that equilibrating of power or seeming status?
You know, I don't know, Inase, you can go first if you'd like, but the example that is coming to mind as I'm listening to Lerzan and Varun talk about is the undergraduate business program in our Dyson School, and they define as their mission statement business for a better world, and they've anteed up by creating in their curriculum what we call our Grand Challenges program. And it's a requisite experience that every single graduating student out of the undergraduate program in the Dyson School must go through, where in their junior and senior year, they are actually engaged in a small group, 5 students project with one of our local community organizations. It could be a non-for-profit, it could be a for-profit organization that is engaged in some kind of sort of overarching goal or objective. And what they do is they go into this project with training from our faculty and staff in terms of gearing their thinking about how to think broadly and more responsibly. So I'm guessing the answer to your question, Tima, is that the equilibrating process that you're talking about, that is such a delicate balance, is something that is done in the preparation of the students for the immersive and engaged experience. And it's so critical to set the expectations for what they're doing going into the project, as much as to make sure through the reinforcement in the critical reflection at the end that takes place at the end. It's sort of like this full-blown feedback loop that is critical in this example that I'm giving you, at least the way we've designed it.
Thank you. Enase, I know you're going to jump in, but I'm going to actually ask you a second question that I would love for you to, I'd love to hear your thoughts on. You're from the Global South, and you have likely a very different perspective of business school education. Likely, I don't know that as a fact, than we do. I would love to hear your observations about how you think education in business education in the Global South, or your context, let's say, may differ from ours, or do you feel that's more alike than different? So feel free to talk about that power differential that might happen with our students, or even this comment on differences.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just briefly speak about the other, which is how do you foster compassion in the students? And I think that there's 2 ways that we do that. The first is that at the start of an MBA program, on the very first day, we tell all the students that you must take on the personal social responsibility project. And that is something that you would run over the course of the program, in addition to the various courses that you would take. And we encourage them to look at society and actually go on and take on a project that can impact society. Now, in that way, they have to go into the local communities and see what it is that's the problem, and then look for a way and what it is that they can do in order to do that. The second is another scheme that we do, which makes them, do something that's not at all about helping. The first is about helping, but then the other is about how can they also benefit. So it's, it's a lean startup scheme in which we give a small grant to each of the MBA students with a task to go on and create a business that not only makes profit, but has a social impact. And we've seen tremendous things happen and transformation of businesses within the community. But then to speak about how business education may be different in the global side, I think that it is more alike. Nowadays, when we talk about global and the interconnectedness of people, it's the same. if we look at the demography of students that go to business school and then get an education, it's the same, whether it's in the more developed north or it's in the global south. So we find a lot of peculiarities. The challenges that assail our world today, be it climate change, environmental issues, social problems, they are the same. The only difference is that business education is contextual. So in other words, the way and the means by which we will address things in this parts is different from what will happen in places in which there are more developed and stronger institutions. So here we try and make a very strong connection between ethics, institutions, and accountability. And that may be somewhat different, I think, maybe in that place, because here, our institutions are still developing, may not be as robust. And therefore, we have to contextualize that for the environment in which we operate in. But in terms of the values, the attitudes, the skills, the competencies we want to foster, I believe that they're very similar.
Enase, very cool to hear that you think that there's a lot of similarities. This is great. Alec Werson has asked, elephant in the room is that faculty are not rewarded for great teaching, still rewarded for research. This is what we need to tackle. And I think that that's a very important point. I'm going to let that be the point that segues into a question. I'm only going to give you one answer. So, because I want to go around the whole room, and that is, what is the one big challenge that you have? And the commentator just mentioned something as well, but what is the one big challenge that you have in putting these ideas into practice within business schools? And just raise your hand and I'll just call on you as to who wants to start. Andrew, go ahead.
Thank you, Tima. I'll go first. Happy to. I think recognizing that the challenges of our time are truly global in scope, and that they represent people who come from incredibly diverse backgrounds. We need to make sure with this global focus, this muscle memory development training for our students, what we need to do is have them experience the importance of this diversity in their daily lives as students. And what that means, and I think of this as my single biggest challenge as a dean of a major college, is to continue to build the diversity of our faculty complement, bringing in more people from underrepresented backgrounds in front of our students to reinforce the importance of the diversity of thinking that is so critical to build this empathy that Lerzan was talking about in our students, to make it so organic and natural in them. It's so critical, and it's such a big challenge in the academy.
So, Andrew, why is it so hard to find diverse faculty? Diverse not just in demographics, I assume that you're saying, but also diversity in thought?
I think it's just an ongoing, it's just a statement of the state, it's the state of play, certainly in the United States, in terms of how we're represented in business school faculty across the United States. Just a statement of fact that we have relatively underrepresentation of women, relative underrepresentation of people who come from backgrounds or from around the world. We need to integrate that more into our faculty, and it's just it's a challenge to continue to build that.
And the socioeconomic differences as well, right? So when business schools are so expensive in the U.S.,
that's right.
How do you get someone from a poor background to be a business school faculty member? So
exactly.
Yeah,
what you need to do is build out a deeper pipeline for development, and we're doing a bunch of things on that front. But I know you want to talk about other things too, but this is a huge priority for us, huge priority for Cornell.
Really good to hear, Andrew. Thank you. Lerzan.
So great question, Tima. And I actually want to link it back to the comment that was made earlier. I think that one of the biggest challenges we're facing is making these topics of sustainability and social responsibility a major source of research for faculty. And this is, a new area for many of them, and they may not necessarily see a direct connection to their expertise. But we need to, as universities, be at the cutting edge of research. And what gets talked about in the classroom and delivered is frequently what our faculty are working on in their research. So there are many ways to do it. And one of the ways that we've done it at Gabelli is through the Responsible Business Coalition. We've worked with corporate partners to encourage and fund scholarly research on these topics. We have a group of 52 CEOs across 275 brands in the fashion space that meet at the Responsible Business Coalition. And so they've been able to engage and offer some of these financial incentives to do research on these topics, as well as subscription to things like Datamaran, a platform, or S&P Market Intelligence, or the MSCI time series. So it's important for our students and our faculty to have access.
Wonderful. And I sincerely appreciate that. Really links back to, I think, what Enase was saying, that when you try to put research into the classroom, research, though, tends to be very backwards looking just because it's based on data. But if what we're seeing right now are things that are happening into the future, it's really important to get business then deeply engaged with that research teaching. So the three now aren't three different worlds. There are three worlds that have now come together that are really important for our students. So I appreciate that, Lerzan. Varun and Enase, who wants to go next with telling us one big challenge? Varun.
Sure thing. Thank you. So I think the challenge here for us is one of trade-offs and time. At the end of the day, one only has so many hours to engage with students, and you need to make a wise choice of what it is that you're going to offer up. And of course, the students have choice in what it is that they're going to take. And I think here we may be speaking at slight cross purposes. Keep in mind, students are coming in with a big loan that they're taking out. Their incentive, especially if they're in their mid-20s, is to get the highest possible compensation post their MBA. They understand what they need to do to go, join the Boston Consulting Groups and Accentures and so forth. And here we are as faculty members trying to add a whole bunch of responsible management kinds of things, many of which they appreciate, by the way, and they will say the right things. But at the end of the day, the incentive that the student has, to a large degree, is about finding the right kind of position. So if you offer up two electives, and one is on the use of blockchain and cryptocurrencies in modern transactions, right? Versus you have something which is much more focused around, let's call it ESG or other aspects of responsible management. The fact is the students will vote with their wallets. And many times the students will pick essentially the thing that is most contemporary, that is most likely to land them the right kind of opportunity. So, there is a little bit of a misalignment, I think, between people's aspirations, what they say and what they do, and what motivates various folks. And so ideally, you would want to answer would be all of the above, right? But the fact is, in a real world, constrained world, trade-offs have to be made, not just by the faculty members, but by students as well. So that's one I'm not sure exactly how to address.
Varun, I can't thank you enough for the candor and the reality check that gives us, because I do think that is so central. And, just a small anecdote, one of my colleagues, once again, research assistant from a student, and she advertised her blockchain position, had just swamped with applications. And yet when we ask for a sustainability type research assistant, we get far fewer. And so I think that there is a contemporary reality that you've really put your finger on that's critical. Enase, last challenge.
Thank you. Lerzan already spoke about my biggest challenge, which is getting faculty to research, because really in responsible management, it cuts across various disciplines, and then to leave their area. Sometimes they think, we're finance, we're marketing, but then to get them to actually consider this and actually go on and carry the research. Well, then the second, which I consider a challenge that we haven't found the solution to yet, is really what happens to the students post-graduation. It's true we do all those things when we're there. We have the hope that when they go out, they will carry on this responsible management practices. But the truth is that sometimes they're going to work in organizations in which their priorities are different. And therefore, they get disillusioned or discouraged in terms of what it is that they can do. So it's how do we create this broader ecosystem that working together, not only with the students, but with companies, especially the large corporations in our part of the world, we can actually get them to understand the importance of responsible management practice and actually start to adopt that to bring about the change in society. That's the big challenge.
Enase, I very much appreciate that, because hidden in, or maybe not even so much hidden in what you just said, is this importance of building communities with our students when they're at school and then after they leave. And that could be one of the big change mechanisms, is for them to feel like they're part of this community that can really create the change. We only have about 4 minutes left. And so if I might ask for a quick lightning round of one last statement that you want to make for this this wonderful audience that we also have. We haven't, I don't know who to start with. So let's just go with Lerzan. What would be your one final statement that you'd like to make?
I'm so proud to be a part of the UN Prime community. I think what they're doing is so important, so critical, and I am really looking forward to continuing to move the ball forward and graduating these students at a very, very much needed time. So I think it's ever more important right now with climate change, with racial injustice coming to the forefront, and ethical decision making. You know, we read in articles in the Wall Street Journal about all this every day. So I'm very proud to be part of this community.
Terrific. Thank you, Lerzan. Enase, why don't we go with you next? What's the final statement that you'd like to leave people with? And you'll have to unmute.
That as business schools, we need to ask ourselves, what is our priority and what is our strategy in fostering responsible management, not only in what we teach, but also in what we practice? That will be my end.
Wonderful. I love that, Enase. Varun, what do you think?
I think we as a community should actually challenge ourselves even beyond responsible management. And I'm going to sort of say, I think responsible innovation might require certain characteristics over and beyond, and maybe different from what we think of when we think of responsible management. Responsible management with ESG frameworks seems heavily around understanding risks, mitigating consequences, and so forth. But when you choose to innovate, and we must, there is no choice, right? We have to innovate our way out of the situation we're in. But innovation requires taking risks. Innovation requires going out on a limb. So the question is, how do you innovate responsibly? And I think the answers there might be a little bit different than just how do you responsibly manage things. So just something for us as a community to think about.
I love that. This switch from risks to opportunity sets through innovation really activates a different mindset about the possibilities of a more flourishing world. And I think that will get those people who like blockchain engaged, as well as the people who like sustainability, to work together. Thank you, Varun. I like that. Andrew.
Being part of Prime is an incredible honor and an incredible opportunity to work with people like you, Tima, Ilya, and Meta, we heard from in the previous session, and also an opportunity to hold ourselves accountable for action. And of course, to share and learn from our wonderful colleagues like I have on this wonderful panel.
Thank you, Andrew. I can always trust you to have that motivation and inspiration at the end. I want to just synthesize in the few seconds I have left, at least what I feel like I've taken away. One is that that we really need to have the content of what we're doing, but the content is changing really, really quickly as we speak. So as ESG, even as Varun said, has moved from risk to now we have to think about innovation. We have to move that content, which requires research, but also requires engagement with people. I also heard Meta introduce this at the beginning, but students are very much wanting to be involved with industry. So we need industry to tell us what's at the front of practice. And the third one, and I said this earlier, is the one that really took me aback right now, and I just love, is this notion of pausing, of reflection, of mindfulness, of compassion, which requires a very different approach than business schools have taken in the past. I am truly, truly grateful to be able to spend this time with 4 amazing deans, and I have learned so much. I hope you have as well. Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the forum.